It was a September night when Robert Harrison, the richest man in Texas, found himself betrayed in the cruelest way possible. His own brothers pushed him off the bridge over Cypress Creek after drugging him during what he believed was a family dinner. As the cold water dragged him away, he heard their voices laughing in the darkness. But Robert didn't die. 3 days later, more dead than alive, he found himself in the arms of a 9-year-old girl who lived in a trailer by the creek. Emma Johnson didn't know she had saved a millionaire. She only saw a man who needed help. And what happened in the following days would prove that sometimes fate has a perfect sense of irony. Those who betray for greed always end up losing everything, while those who save out of love gain more than they could ever imagine. Robert Harrison stared at the glass of red wine his brother Michael had just poured for him, feeling uneasiness growing in his chest. At 60 years old, he had built an empire worth $200 million, from Harrison Industries spanning real estate to technology, from oil drilling to luxury hotels. They were sitting in the dining room of the family ranch in Austin, the same table where their grandmother had always preached that brotherly love was their strength. He had always supported them, paying generous salaries to his brothers for jobs they often didn't do, believing in the value of family. Michael, 57, had always lived in the shadow of his older brother, wasting every opportunity he received. Luke, 54, was intelligent but envious, hiding behind fake smiles, a resentment that grew every day. That evening, they had organized a dinner to discuss future investments. Robert had brought important documents: wills, stocks, access codes to bank accounts. He wanted to involve his brothers more in business decisions, thinking it was time to pass the torch. He never imagined he had signed his own death warrant. The wine tasted strange, slightly bitter. Robert only drank a few sips before feeling his vision blur. His brothers' faces seemed out of focus. Their voices came as if from far away. With growing horror, he realized he had been drugged. He looked at his brothers, and in their eyes saw not concern, but cold calculation. Michael began rummaging through Robert's briefcase, pulling out documents and keys. Luke approached the laptop and started copying files. They talked to each other as if Robert no longer existed, discussing how to stage a tragic accident. A drunk man who slipped from the bridge while driving home. No one would ask questions. They loaded him into the car like a sack. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness as they drove through the Texas countryside in the night, heading toward the bridge over Cypress Creek, the old stone one isolated and surrounded by woods. Perfect for their purposes. They dragged him out of the car, while Robert desperately fought to stay conscious. He heard their voices, like in a dream, but every word was a dagger to his heart. 40 years living off his scraps. 40 years being told how lucky they were to have such a generous brother. They pushed him against the bridge railing. Cypress Creek flowed 15 feet below, dark and silent. Robert managed to grip the stones, but Michael stomped on his fingers until he let go. The creek welcomed him like a deadly caress. The current was stronger than it appeared, and Robert, still dazed from the drug, couldn't swim. Water filled his lungs. Darkness enveloped him. The last thing he remembered was the sound of the engine driving away, taking forever the brothers he had loved more than his own life. Emma Johnson woke at dawn, as she did every day since she could remember. At 9 years old, she had already learned that life is hard when you live in a rusty trailer by the creek, without parents, and with only a sick grandmother. Grandma Rose was 78 and had arthritis that made her moan every time she moved. The two of them lived off what Emma could scrape together, helping at nearby farms for a few dollars, collecting herbs and mushrooms in the woods, finding cans to sell for recycling. That September morning, as she went down to the creek to get water as she did every day, she saw something that made her stop dead. Among the branches and debris carried by the current, there was what looked like a man's body. Emma didn't hesitate for a second. She dove into the creek, without thinking about the cold or danger, driven by that instinct to help others that Grandma Rose had taught her. The water reached her chest, but she managed to grab the man and drag him to shore. He was alive, but barely. He breathed with difficulty, had bruises all over his body, and a head wound that was bleeding. His elegant clothes were torn and dirty, but Emma didn't pay attention to these details. She only saw a human being who needed help. With strength she didn't know she had, she managed to drag him to the trailer. Grandma Rose, despite her arthritis, helped her bring him inside and settle him on their only bed. They immediately began caring for him with what they had: clean water, medicinal herbs, infinite love and dedication. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he saw the angelic face of that little girl who cared for him like a son. Other times he heard the sweet voice of the old woman praying beside the bed, asking God to save this stranger the creek had brought to them. For 3 days, Emma didn't move from his bedside. She changed bandages, gave him water by spoonfuls, spoke to him softly to keep him tied to life. Grandma Rose had sold her last jewelry to buy medicine and nutritious food. On the 4th day, when the fever began to subside, Robert finally managed to speak. When he asked why they were doing all this for him, Emma looked at him with those big, pure eyes that seemed to contain all the wisdom in the world. Her answer came simple, but pure. He was in trouble, and when someone needs help, you don't ask questions. You just help, as Grandma Rose always taught. Robert felt tears stream down his cheeks. In recent years, surrounded by people who only respected him for his money, he had forgotten that this form of pure, selfless love still existed. A poor girl and a sick old woman were giving everything to save a stranger, while his blood brothers had thrown him in the creek to steal his fortune. In the days that followed, as his strength slowly returned, Robert began to truly know Emma and Grandma Rose. He discovered that the girl had never been to school because they had to work to survive, but she had a hunger for knowledge that amazed him. She asked him 1,000 questions about the world, about books, about distant countries. Grandma Rose told him their story. Emma had been orphaned at 3 when her parents died in a car accident. She had taken her in despite poverty and illness. They lived on the margins of society, invisible to everyone, but had built a small world made of love and solidarity. Robert listened, feeling his heart break. These women had so little but were so rich inside. He had had everything but had surrounded himself with people who hated him and wanted him dead. One evening, as Emma read him a fairy tale with a sweet voice, Robert made a decision. He wouldn't return to his previous life. He wouldn't seek revenge against his brothers. Instead, he would give his saviors all the love and gratitude they deserved. He would discover if it was possible to start over, building a true family based on love and not blood. After 2 weeks, Robert was strong enough to get out of bed. Emma had found him clean clothes, probably traded for something she considered precious. She looked at him with the pride of someone who had saved a life, but also with the sadness of someone who knows their guest would soon leave. Robert had not yet revealed his true identity. To them, he was simply Mr. Robert, a kind man the creek had brought into their lives, but inside, he was forming a plan that would forever change the destiny of this small family. One morning, while Emma had gone to the market to sell the herbs she collected, Robert found himself alone with Grandma Rose. The old woman was watching him with those wise eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Her words came direct. He wasn't an ordinary man. You could tell by the way he spoke, how he moved, and those clothes he wore were expensive, even if ruined by water. Robert looked at her for a long time before answering. In that old woman, he saw the honesty he had sought all his life. He decided to tell her everything. His real name, Robert Harrison, the $200 million empire he owned before that night. The brothers who had betrayed him in the cruelest way, drugging him and throwing him in the creek to take everything. Grandma Rose didn't seem surprised. She nodded slowly, as if she had always known she was hosting someone important. When she asked what he wanted to do now, Robert looked toward the door, imagining Emma returning with her bright smile. He wanted to stay dead to the world, at least for now. He wanted to understand what it truly meant to be alive. Emma had saved his life, but most importantly, his soul. In recent years, he had felt so alone, so empty, despite having everything money could buy. Grandma Rose smiled with that sweetness her granddaughter had inherited, then let him stay with them. The trailer was small and poor, but there was room for those with clean hearts. When Emma returned, Robert made her the most important proposal of his life. He wanted to stay with them, not as a guest, but as part of the family. He had hidden money, Swiss accounts his brothers didn't know about, and wanted to use them to give Emma the education she deserved, and Grandma Rose the medical care she needed. Emma listened with eyes filling with tears of joy. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her stability and love without asking for anything in return. When she said modestly that she didn't know how to do anything important, Robert took her small hands, the ones that had pulled him from the water. He explained that she knew how to do the most important thing in the world, love, and that was all needed to build a true family. Robert began organizing their new life. Using false documents and trusted contacts, he accessed Swiss accounts opened years before. He bought a beautiful house in the countryside, far from Austin, and places where he could be recognized. The house had a large garden where Emma could play and grow herbs, and a bright room for Grandma Rose with all the comforts. The most important thing was enrolling Emma in school. The girl learned to read and write with speed that amazed teachers. Robert tutored her privately, discovering he loved teaching more than any business deal he had ever closed. In the following months, Robert discovered happiness he had never known. Every day was full of small joys: taking Emma to school, shopping with Grandma Rose, working in the garden they built together. He learned to cook, to fix things around the house, to live a normal life that had seemed impossible before. For the first time in 60 years, Robert Harrison was truly alive. While Robert built his new life, brothers Michael and Luke discovered that stealing an empire is much harder than managing it. The first months after Robert's death had been euphoric. They had convinced everyone it was a tragic accident, inherited everything according to the forged will, and sat in the command chairs feeling finally like masters of the world. But euphoria didn't last long. Robert had built his empire over 40 years of sacrifice, study, and brilliant intuition. He knew every detail of every deal, had personal relationships with all important clients. Michael and Luke only had greed, but completely lacked competence and vision. Problems began with international contracts.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Robert had agreements based on trust built over years, but when partners found themselves facing the brothers, everything changed. They had no credibility, couldn't handle complex negotiations, didn't understand market subtleties. In 6 months, they lost $3 billion contracts. Hotels began losing guests because service quickly deteriorated. Oil drilling projects stopped due to evaluation errors. Real estate developments stalled because of poor relationships with local authorities. The real disaster came when they started fighting each other. The greed that had united them in crime now divided them in splitting the loot. Michael wanted to focus on tourism, Luke on real estate. Instead of collaborating, they began sabotaging each other. The most trusted employees, those who had worked with Robert for decades, began leaving one by one. They saw the company dying and didn't want to sink with the ship. Some had suspicions about the true nature of Robert's death, but lacked proof. 12 months after the murder, Harrison Industries was on the verge of bankruptcy. Debts exceeded revenues. Clients had moved to competitors. Banks were calling in loans. What Robert had built in a lifetime, they were destroying in a year. One evening, they met in the same restaurant where they had planned their brother's assassination. But this time, they looked at each other with growing hatred. Each accused the other of ruining everything, and in their rage, they began practically confessing the murder in public. They didn't notice the man at the nearby table recording every word. It was David Martinez, Robert's trusted assistant, who had been investigating his employer's suspicious death for months. Robert never drank too much, was an expert swimmer, and most importantly, never drove drunk. The next day, David delivered the recording to the police. The investigation was reopened with thorough inquiries. They found traces of drugs in the car, witnesses who had seen the brothers that night, inconsistencies in their alibis. Within days, Michael and Luke were arrested for premeditated murder and fraud. The press went wild with headlines about the family that kills for inheritance. But there was a problem. Robert's body had never been found, keeping alive a small hope that he might still be alive. For Robert, reading in the newspapers about the empire's fall and his brother's arrest was liberating. Justice had taken its course without him having to lift a finger. His would-be killers had destroyed themselves with their own greed, but most importantly, he felt finally free. Free from the weight of an empire that had made him rich but unhappy. Free from false and interested relationships. Free to simply be himself with the two women who loved him for what was in his heart. 2 years after that night on the bridge, life had taken an incredible turn. Emma had become one of the brightest students in her class. At 11, she already spoke 3 languages, played piano, and had a passion for natural sciences that led her to do experiments in the garden with Grandpa Robert. Grandma Rose was 78, but seemed 20 years younger. The medical care Robert had provided had improved her arthritis, and the joy of seeing her granddaughter flourish had given her new energy. She spent her days cooking, telling stories of her youth, and loving this unusual but love-filled family. Robert was 58 and had never felt so young. Every morning he woke up smiling, knowing the day would be full of small joys. Taking Emma to school, shopping with Grandma Rose, working in the garden they built together. He had learned to cook, to fix things around the house, to live a normal life that had seemed impossible before. Their house had become a reference point for the whole community. Robert, with his culture and experience, helped young people find jobs, gave advice for small businesses, had organized evening English classes. He never revealed his real name, but everyone respected him for his wisdom and generosity. One spring evening, as they dined in the garden under the pergola Robert had built, Emma asked a question that changed his heart. She wanted to know if he was happy with them. Robert put down his fork and looked at that girl who had become the light of his life. Before meeting her and Grandma Rose, he confessed, he didn't even know what happiness meant. He had had so much money he couldn't count it. But inside he was empty. Now he didn't have anything from before, but possessed everything that truly mattered. Grandma Rose smiled with wisdom. The Lord had strange ways of fixing things. He had sent Emma to save the body of a rich man, but actually had saved the soul of a man poor inside. That night, Robert made a shocking discovery. In Emma's diary, he found an essay written for school titled My Family. Reading it with Grandma Rose's permission, he was moved to tears. Emma had written about how strange but beautiful their family was. Grandpa Robert wasn't her real grandfather, but was better than any grandfather in the world. She had found him in the creek when she was 9, and since then her life had become magical. Before they were poor and sad, now rich in love and happy every day. Robert cried reading those lines. That girl he thought he had saved from poverty had actually saved him from true poverty, that of the soul. The next day he made the most important decision. He went to the lawyer and made a will, leaving everything to Emma and Grandma Rose. But most importantly, he started procedures for Emma's legal adoption. When he told her, the girl exploded in tears of joy and threw herself around his neck. Grandma Rose blessed that decision, seeing that finally Emma would have the stability she deserved. The process was complex due to Robert's age and the fact that he was officially dead, but thanks to discreet lawyers, he managed to arrange everything. Emma Johnson became Emma Harrison, and Robert became her legal father. The day of the adoption's official approval was the most beautiful of Robert's life. Leaving the courthouse, when Emma asked if he was now really her dad forever, he answered with his heart exploding with joy. The girl replied with that wisdom that always amazed him. It didn't matter if he had been rich or poor before. What mattered was that now they were a true family. Robert understood she was right. Everything he had lost, millions, empire, social position, meant nothing compared to what he had gained. The unconditional love of a daughter and the warmth of an authentic family. 5 years had passed since that terrible night on the bridge, and Robert Harrison was officially dead to the world. His brothers were serving life sentences. The empire had been divided among creditors, and in business history, books he remained as the man assassinated by his own family. But Robert was more alive than ever. At 65, he had completely white hair and a few more wrinkles, but his eyes shone with a light he'd never had when rich. Emma was 16 and had become extraordinary, brilliant at school, kind to everyone, full of dreams. She wanted to become a doctor to help people like her adoptive father had helped her. Grandma Rose was 83, and, despite her age, was still the beating heart of that family. Her eyes always smiled seeing Robert and Emma together, knowing she had witnessed one of life's most beautiful miracles. Their house had become even more welcoming over the years. Robert had added a porch where Emma studied, a laboratory for her scientific experiments, and a small library full of books she devoured with the same hunger she once had for herbs in the woods. One May evening, during dinner, Emma made an announcement that moved Robert to tears. She had decided to study medicine, but not to become just any doctor. She wanted to specialize in emergency medicine, to save people like he had saved her life, and like she had saved his. And when she became a doctor, she wanted to open a free clinic for the poor. She would call it Robert Harrison Clinic, in honor of the best dad in the world. Robert burst into tears. The idea that this wonderful girl wanted to honor his name, not that of the tycoon he had been, but of the man he had become, filled him with indescribable emotion. That night, sitting in the garden with Grandma Rose, Robert confessed something he had never said. When his brothers threw him in the creek, in the seconds before losing consciousness, he had prayed. He had asked God for a second chance to be happy, to find a true family that would love him for what he was. Now he understood that God hadn't just given him a second chance. He had given him the life he should have always had. Before he was rich in money, but poor in love. Now he was poor in money, but rich in love. And this was true wealth. Grandma Rose answered with wisdom. Emma hadn't saved him by chance that morning. It was destiny. He needed to learn what it meant to love and be loved, and Emma needed a dad who would give her all the opportunities she deserved. Destiny had brought them together because they were perfect for each other. The next day, Robert went to the cemetery where Emma's mother was buried. He knelt before the grave with fresh flowers, thanking that woman he had never known. Her daughter had saved his life and soul. He promised he would protect and love her for all his remaining days, and that she would become the best doctor in America. Returning home, he found Emma waiting for him with a special gift, a photo album prepared secretly with Grandma Rose. The pages showed moments of daily life that were more precious to him than any treasure. Emma studying, playing piano, cooking with Grandma Rose. The last page made him cry. There was a recent photo where all three were embracing in the garden, smiling and happy. Below, Emma had written in beautiful handwriting, "To the most beautiful family in the world. To Grandma Rose, who taught me love. To Dad Robert, who taught me that miracles exist. I love you more than my own life." That evening, watching the stars from the pergola, Robert knew he was living the most perfect moment of his existence. He had a daughter who adored him, a mother-in-law who treated him like a son, a house full of love, and the certainty of having found life's meaning. His brothers were in prison. His empire had crumbled. His name was associated with tragedy in newspapers. But Robert Harrison was the richest man in the world because he possessed the only thing money can't buy: the true love of a family chosen by the heart. When he fell asleep that night in his simple but warm bed, with the sound of Emma's peaceful breathing in the next room and the scent of Grandma Rose's flowers coming through the window, Robert smiled, knowing this was true success. Not what you build with money, but what you build with love, because in the end, the only wealth that remains is what you carry in your heart. And Robert's heart was fuller than it had ever been when he owned $200 million. Like, if you believe true love is the only wealth that matters, comment which part of the story touched you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in the power of family love. Subscribe for more stories of second chances and families of the heart. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. Sometimes those who betray you give you the greatest gift: the freedom to start over. And sometimes the purest love comes from where you least expect it, because true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in smiles, hugs, and hearts beating together.